Hey, welcome to the lecture on strings and ints. This is going to be the first lecture where we actually dive into doing some Java coding, which is cool. So let's go ahead and delete this system.out.println stuff where we said we were a cat and all that silly things. Now I just want you to know for the rest of this Java school, what's in between these little curly brackets here, this is kind of our domain. This is where we live. So we can make as much space in here as we want or as little as we want. I'm just hitting the enter button to get this space delete to kind of shrink it down, but any code that we write should go between these two curly brackets, and I want you to experiment on your own. I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that. I'm going to have a little challenge for you at the end of each lecture, but everything you do should be inside of these curly brackets, and a lot of the mistakes that I see happen when people are typing code, you know, up in here or up here, down below these. You want to go inside of these two curly brackets. So the first thing I'm going to teach you about is something called a string. And a string essentially is a way to hold text inside of Java programming. So to make your very first string, all we're going to do is type string, and then we're going to type name. So do string space name, and then space equal to, another space, we're going to do some two quotation marks, two double quotes, and then inside of there just type your name. So I'm going to type Nick Walter inside of there. And then afterwards I'm going to put a little semicolon, okay? So this is our very first string. Now it doesn't look like much, it's kind of a weeny little thing, but what it is we said we want to make a new string, and we're going to call this string name, and it's equal to Nick Walter. Now this thing called name, which is a string, is holding the information Nick Walter. And we can put any sort of text that we want into here. So we could put something like, hello there, friend. Like do a smiley face, stuff like that. Like we can do all sorts of things here inside the string. We can even put numbers inside of here, right? Like we can do that. We can do letters. We can type whatever it is that we want in here. This all works as a string because it's just represented as text, okay? So that's what a string is. A string is basically a way to represent text. Now let's talk about what an int is, okay? So I'm going to come down here and type int, and notice the int is lowercase. The string up here was uppercase, but an int is lowercase. You say int space age is equal to, and now we're just going to type some sort of number. So I'm going to say my age, and that is 27, and then I'm going to do a semicolon again. Okay, and this is our very first int. So ints hold numbers, whereas strings are holding you know, characters, text, numbers, whatever it wants, but ints hold numbers. So for example, if I try and put like my name here, int age is equal to Nick Walter, Android Studio is going to bark at me. It's like, whoa, what are you doing? Like this is not right. And you may say, oh, well, it's just because there's a space here. Let's get rid of that. No, that's not the issue. Ints are ways to represent numbers, and they're whole numbers too. So if I try and say like, you know, this number 0.56, we're going to get an issue as well. So ints are a way to represent whole numbers, and strings are a way to represent text. That's the main thing that I want you to take away from this lecture. And you may be thinking, okay, I know that a string represents text and an int represents numbers, but like, how is this cool at all? What is this supposed to mean? Well, don't worry. With time, we're going to build more and more, and you're going to say, now I kind of get the vibe here. One more thing before I ended this lecture though. Notice how at the end of this we have these little semicolons here. In Java, at the end of every line of code, you want to have some semicolons. So you may be asking yourself, yeah, I see a semicolon up here, but what about this one that says public class my class and has a curly bracket? Like, there's no there's no semicolon at the end of that. There's no semicolon here. Like, what do you mean you need it at every line? I guess I should say most lines. So anywhere that you're using these curly bracket things, and I'll show you what these are about further on inside of Java School. But typically each line of code that we write, we're gonna have a semicolon at the end of it. So that's again another very common thing. If you've written some great code and you're like, I don't get what's wrong here, like why isn't it working? Well, you probably forgot that semicolon at the end, so be aware of that. Alright, so we covered strings and ints. We're moving along. Next, we are going to learn about printing, okay? See you in the next lecture.